It was called 15 minutes of pure terror, and indeed it was. But what came afterwards was worth it. Joy, pride and excitement. I don't need to tell you why, because India's Chandrayaan 3 mission has succeeded. As the ISRO chairman said, India is on the moon. All eyes were focused on the mission control room in Bengaluru. It was a room full of tense faces, politicians, bureaucrats, and the most terrified of the lot are scientists. They had been here before. In 2019, India was focused on a similar mission control room. We were waiting for Chandrayaan 2 to land. It was a heartbreaking moment for the whole country. But today, all that pain has been forgotten. I'll be honest though, the countdown was nerve-wracking. ISRO had a display of how far the module was from the moon, and with each minute, it kept dropping. 40 kilometers, 20 kilometers, 10 kilometers, and finally 0. The Vikram lander had successfully arrived on the moon. We were watching the scenes from the control room in our newsroom. The roar was deafening. I can only imagine what it was like inside that room, the tension, the expectation, and in the end, the elation. As we speak, India's rover is driving around on the moon, and that too on the south pole of the moon. It's a historic first. We told you about this yesterday. No country has ever landed on this part of the moon. It's dark, it is tough terrain, and it's uncharted. But right now, India has a rover there. It's truly a proud moment in India's history. A big congratulations and thank you to all the scientists at ISRO. You have given us a great gift. It's also a tribute to ISRO's persistence. We were talking about a very complicated maneuver here. The Vikram lander was heading towards the moon at 6,000 kilometers per hour. 6,000, that's 10 times the speed of a plane. To land such a fast-moving object on the moon is not easy. Come to think about it, landing at such speeds on the Earth is not easy either, but the ISRO did it, and that too without a $1 billion budget. The total spending on Chandrayaan 3 was $75 million. That's 5 times less than a Boeing 777. 2/3 of the budget of Hollywood films like Gravity and Interstellar. It's a lesson on ingenuity. It's also an inspiration for the entire world. Space was considered the playground of the rich. The US and the Soviet Union had money to spare, so they took turns launching rockets. Others simply watched and admired. But India has shown it's not a rich boys' club. You don't need big, endless budgets to reach the moon. What you need is expertise, talent, and confidence, and ISRO has all three. Even before the landing, the world was all praises. Corporate leaders like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos said they were rooting for Chandrayaan 3. Even Pakistan was rooting for it. Their former information minister Fawad Chaudhry said, "It's a great moment for mankind for once we agree with him." In fact, he wanted the landing to be broadcast in Pakistan. Tells you how important this day is. And the journey makes it even more special. India's space mission has overcome countless obstacles. Sanctions, lack of resources, lack of political support, technical failures, launch issues. I could go on, but each obstacle made ISRO stronger. It made our scientists aim higher and higher. Today's landing is the result of their hard work. It's also the start of something bigger. India has plans to send astronauts to space by 2025, and who knows, maybe rovers on Mars. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, let's look at how Vikram the lander and Pragyaan the rover landed on the moon. Take a look at this.
The tension was palpable. Expectant faces peered at the giant screen in front of them. Complicated numbers danced around. ISRO's former chairman had called it 15 minutes of terror. He wasn't wrong. Thousands of kilometers away, India's lunar module was making its final descent. Destination: South Pole of the Moon. In 2019, India's second lunar mission had crashed here. Last week, a Russian module met the same fate. So the pressure was extra. With each second the lander got closer, it was traveling at more than 6,000 kilometers per hour. To land from that speed isn't easy. It would take skill and precision. A few minutes past 6 p.m. Indian time, ISRO's mission control room exploded. Elated scientists screamed and hugged each other in relief. On the giant screen, Prime Minister Narendra Modi joined in. He waved an Indian flag from South Africa. The mission was accomplished. Vikram, the lander, had reached the South Pole.
Sir, we have achieved soft landing on the moon. India is on the moon.
Years of hard work led to this moment. Around 1,000 scientists and engineers worked on Chandrayaan 3. The total budget, just over $75 million. But what ISRO lacked in funds, it made up with in ingenuity. For most people, the moon is an obsession. For scientists researching it, for business leaders wanting to colonize it, for parents singing lullabies about it. So, reaching the moon often becomes a national obsession. And India was no different. Chandrayaan 3 lifted off from Sriharikota on the 14th of July. Since then, Indians have been marking their calendar. August 23rd was D-Day. Millions of Indians tuned in to watch ISRO's live stream. Around 8 million to be precise. As the lander touched down, celebrations began. Not just inside the control room, but across the country. The Prime Minister addressed the scientists afterwards. He said New India had witnessed a new flight.
India's successful moon mission is not just India's alone. This is a year in which the world is witnessing India's G20 presidency. Our approach of one Earth, one family, one future is resonating across the globe. This human-centric approach that we present and that we represent has been welcomed universally.
So, what's next for Chandrayaan 3? Vikram the lander isn't alone on the moon. Stored inside is Pragyaan the rover. Both have a planned mission life of 1 lunar day. Here on Earth, that's around 2 weeks. The rover will drive around on the moon's surface. It'll send back crucial data to ISRO. Scientists are most excited about the prospect of water. Many believe the South Pole could be holding frozen water. If so, Pragyaan will find it. It'll also leave India's mark on the moon, quite literally. The rover's wheels carry the Indian emblem along with ISRO's logo. As it explores the moon's dark and mysterious South Pole, it'll also imprint these logos on the surface. The moon has no wind or erosion, so the prints will remain for a long, long time. Perhaps as long as the moon exists. It's a tribute to how far India's space program has come. From carrying satellites on bicycles, to being pinned down by sanctions, to landing and exploring the moon. But don't think the story is over. Today's landing is the beginning of another chapter in India's space story. ISRO Chairman S. Somnath alluded to it.
Honorable Prime Minister called me and conveyed his greetings to each one of you and your family for the wonderful work you did in ISRO. Thanks are to him for the support that he is giving to us for missions like Chandrayaan 3 and the missions that are in the offing. I think that's a great word of comfort that we are receiving for pursuing the inspirational work that we are doing for the nation. I want to tell you, and I want to thank you also for each and everyone who prayed with us in the last many days, who wanted this success to happen in ISRO. I thank all those people all around the country and maybe beyond the country for their blessings and wishes and affection that he has given to each one of us for doing this work for the last so many years.
The world is lining up to congratulate India. NASA chief Bill Nelson extended his wishes. So did South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa and the Maldivian President Ibrahim Soli. For many countries, this is a watershed moment. It proves the moon isn't a luxury trip. It doesn't need endless budgets. You can reach the moon with talent, skill, and confidence. ISRO displayed all three. Only 3 countries had landed on the moon until now: the United States, the erstwhile Soviet Union, and China. India's Pragyaan has now joined this elite club. So, what's next for ISRO? We could say the sky is the limit, but it's clearly not. India has plans to send astronauts into space. It's also planning another mission to Mars and a separate probe to the Sun. Exciting times if you follow ISRO. But today is all about soaking in the moment. The moon you hear about in poems and tales isn't unreachable anymore. It's the runway for India's Rover.
The other big story tonight is the BRICS summit. This year's summit had a lot of promise, but in the end it turned out to be like a packet of chips. Great packaging, but once you open it, what you get is a lot of air and very little substance. Although it had its moments, like this one. This is from earlier today. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa was welcoming India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. As they walk up, Modi spots the Indian flag on the floor. This was a mark for him to stand on. This is where he was supposed to stand for the photo. But instead of standing on it, the Prime Minister picked it up and put it in his pocket. The South African leader saw what happened, and he did the same with his flag. Well, optics aside, what were the tangible outcomes? Let's start with China. Their contingent struggled. Beijing had big plans for BRICS this year. They wanted to fundamentally change the group, to add more members, to get a common currency, and more importantly, to take a tougher stand against the West. The Chinese president made a power play at BRICS.
We need to use the BRICS Plus cooperation well and accelerate the expansion process. Let more countries join the BRICS family, pool wisdom, and gather strength to make global governance more fair and reasonable.
But in the end, he generated more bad press. Yesterday, Xi Jinping suddenly went missing. He skipped an important event, the BRICS Business Forum. All other leaders were present. One by one, they delivered their statements. Even Vladimir Putin spoke. He was not there in person, but he joined the summit virtually. Xi Jinping was the only leader who did not attend. He was in South Africa, but he sent his commerce minister to deliver his speech. What do you think happened to Xi Jinping? He wasn't late to the event. Before the business forum, he was present at all engagements. He even showed up to receive an award, the Order of South Africa, the country's highest civilian order. He's on a state visit there. But for some reason, he decided to skip one event. No explanation given. Was he unhappy about something? Did he fall ill? Was there a pressing matter that needed his urgent attention? China won't say. It never does. Foreign minister goes missing, silence. President goes missing, silence. All you have is awkward Chinese diplomats giving standard answers. It happened again today when they were asked about Xi Jinping's disappearing act. They acted like it did not happen. Listen to this.
Yesterday afternoon, President Xi Jinping delivered a speech to the Business Forum.
Can you believe it? Even the text statement said the same, that Xi Jinping delivered the speech, except he did not. Wang Wentao, China's commerce minister, read out the remarks. It was basically a long rant full of anti-West rhetoric. The speech criticized the United States and defended China's economic policies. It said, and I'm quoting, "China is on the right side of history and hegemonism is not in China's DNA."
We have gained democratic independence through great hardship and sacrifice, and we have continued to explore a path of development that is in line with our own national conditions. All that we have done, in the final analysis, is to enable our people to lead a prosperous life. However, some countries, unwilling to give up their hegemonic position, have arbitrarily blocked and suppressed emerging market countries and developing countries.
China says it doesn't want a competition with the US. What it wants instead is a new world order with China at its center. And Russia has backed this position. Listen to what Russian President Vladimir Putin said.
I would like to point out that namely the aspiration to preserve this hegemony in the world, the aspiration of certain countries to preserve this hegemony has led to the severe crisis in Ukraine. First, the Western countries helped to commit an anti-constitutional coup in that country, and a war was unleashed against those who did not agree to this coup. A brutal war, a war of attrition which lasted for 8 years.
Both China and Russia are pushing for changes at BRICS. They want expansion. More members, more friendly countries means more clout. India and Brazil do not agree with this approach. They want to be selective on new members. Prime Minister Modi spoke about this today. He said there should be consensus before a new member is let in.
एक्सेलेंसी, भारत ब्रिक्स की सदस्यता में विस्तार का पूरा समर्थन करता है और इसमें कॉन्सेंसस के साथ आगे बढ़ने का स्वागत करता है। 2016 में भारत की अध्यक्षता के दौरान हमने ब्रिक्स को बिल्डिंग रिस्पॉन्सिव, इंक्लूसिव एंड कलेक्टिव सॉल्यूशन से परिभाषित किया था। 7 साल बाद हम कह सकते हैं कि ब्रिक्स विल बी ब्रेकिंग बैरियर्स, revitalizing economies, inspiring innovation, creating opportunities, and shaping the future.
What about the proposal on common currencies? The idea has some traction, but there are differences on the approach. China wants the BRICS to use the yuan. Brazil does not agree. Here's what their president, Lula da Silva, said.
The creation of a currency for trade and investment transactions between BRICS members increases our payment options and reduces our vulnerabilities.
So no consensus on a common currency either. China's proposals fell flat, but the host South Africa promised to keep the discussions going.
We are concerned that global financial and payment systems are increasingly being used as instruments of geopolitical contestation. Global economic recovery relies on predictable global payment systems and the smooth operating of banking, supply chains, trade, tourism, as well as financial flows.
So no major takeaways to write home about. That was the BRICS summit for you, held hostage to different political priorities. Our next story is about free trade agreements or FTAs. They're considered panacea in the world of trade. You sign an FTA, your trade booms. But it turns out that's not always the case. India has signed around 13 free trade agreements with Australia, with the UAE, and with ASEAN members, also with Japan. The idea is quite simple. When you sign FTAs, you reduce barriers to trade, like quotas or tariffs or duties. You reduce all of them. As a result, bilateral trade increases, or that's the assumption. But in India, the recent trend is worrying. Let's look at the first half of 2023. That's January to June. India's overall exports declined by 8.1%. But India's exports to FTA partners declined by 18.2%. And this is worrying. In the first 6 months of 2022, FTA partners made up 30% of India's exports. This fell to 26% in the first half of this year. If your exports fall, your deficit widens, meaning you import more than you export. That's deficit. India's FTA deficit was $28 billion last year. This year, it's $30 billion. In other words, India's import bill from its FTA partners is $30 billion more than its export bill. ASEAN countries make up almost half of this deficit. This is a group of 10 countries in Southeast Asia, ASEAN. They make up about half of the deficit, so there is a huge trade imbalance. And the government realizes this. They've decided to review the free trade agreement with ASEAN. The review should be completed by 2025. But what explains this rising imbalance? One reason is global sluggishness. The World Trade Organization says global trade will grow by 1.7% this year. Last year, it was 2.7%. So trade has slowed down, and this is a global problem. But that alone does not explain India's situation. Our main problem is exports. Let me explain how this works. Around 18 items make up 75% of India's merchandise exports. Things like cereals, fruits and vegetables, textiles, spices, fish. India exported less of these goods in the first half of this year. Now, do you see the problem here? These are not all-weather exports. If the monsoon is bad, India may have to curb food exports. If inflation rises, same thing. We've already limited rice and wheat exports. And when that happens, the deficit widens. So what is the solution? To focus on more reliable sectors like telecom or computers or pharma. These items make up 25% of India's exports, and guess what? These exports grew in the first half of this year. So if the idea is to diversify your shipments away from agriculture, agro products are important, no two ways about it, but they cannot be your only driver. If they are, your trade deficit will keep widening. It was $191 billion in 2021. It increased to $267 billion last year. That's a rise of almost 40%. Now, I know what a lot of people will say. Oil prices were up. If you pay more for oil, your import bill will rise anyway, which is true. But other countries have figured out solutions. Take Japan, for instance. They registered a trade surplus in June this year. It was the first in 2 years, a trade surplus. Same with South Korea. They registered a surplus in June, their first in 15 months. And so did China. Their trade surplus last year was $877 billion. And all these countries import energy, yet they posted surpluses. My point is, it is possible. India needs to strengthen its industrial base, attract more foreign investment. It's the only way to overcome this deficit. As for free trade agreements, it's a wake-up call. Simply signing them is not enough. We need to secure competitive terms. Now, India is currently involved in 2 major FTA talks. One is with Britain, the other is with the European Union, the EU. Both are very important trade partners, but more importantly, they're developed economies. So you need to negotiate harder, and I'll tell you why. Recently, the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, warned against green protectionism. What does that mean? Western countries are using climate action to justify protectionism. For example, subsidies. The US recently passed a law to fight inflation. It's called the Inflation Reduction Act. This law gives subsidies worth $7,500 to people who buy electric cars. It's a great idea, right? Just one problem though. That car must have been assembled in North America. So EVs made in India or Japan or China or Vietnam have no chance. Why would customers just abandon thousands of dollars in subsidies? Europe has done something similar. In October, they will introduce a carbon tax. Say you import steel from India to Europe or aluminium from Africa. Now, these places have more relaxed laws on emissions. So Europe says you will have to pay a tax now, a tax for producing in and importing from the developing world. Now, imagine you're a producer. What would you do? You either pay the tax or you shift your company to Europe. Such policies are being called a new wave of protectionism. It would have a massive impact on India's exports. So 2 things to watch out for here: more industrial production and better negotiation at the trade table. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with South Africa. As we told you, the BRICS summit is underway. During a photo op, each leader's spot to stand was marked with the flag of their respective country. Indian Prime Minister Modi made sure not to step on the tricolour. In fact, he picked it up and kept it in his pocket. Meanwhile, in China, a massive fire broke out in an office building in the city of Tianjin. More than 200 firefighters and 62 fire engines have been deployed to control the blaze. And a rocket was launched into the space from Kazakhstan. The aim is to restock the International Space Station with food and fuel. And finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1966, the Earth was photographed for the very first time from the Moon's orbit. The picture was transmitted back to Earth by the Lunar Orbiter 1. On that note, we're calling it a wrap. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
liftoff of the 85th Progress resupply mission to the International Space Station. Tower is clear. All first stage engines operating normally according to the reports. There's the skirt jettisoning of the third stage.